Sylvester, thanks for making time to talk to me this afternoon. It's a long while since you finished the Masters at the University of Greenwich with me. I think 2001. It's a long time ago, even before the Cape Town Declaration in 2002. I'm intrigued that you've finally written the book, which I've been expecting you to write for a while. Why did you write the book?
Thanks, Harold. Thanks for having me. It has been a long time, and the book has been a long time in writing, almost starting from the time I finished the master's program. I wrote the book because I felt having experimented a lot across the Caribbean and trying to share a lot of what we had learned and to apply what the thinking and the thesis that we had developed in the course, and seeing it not working as well as it attempted to work on paper. I thought it was important to document the lessons that we had learned, that I had learned from those experiments that we'd done, certainly in St. Lucia, and my attempt to teach in many ways running responsible tourism or sustainable tourism programs in several Caribbean countries.
So, has your experience been like mine, that you can have some general principles about what community-based tourism is, but actually when it comes down to it, you've got to work with the community. It's not something you can give to the community. You've got to work with them so that they take it and create something that works for them and works for you and for the community as a whole. It's
Yes, and
not something you can insist that they do it in a particular way.
exactly. And that's the gap I found after we ended the Heritage Tourism Program in 2006, that there was significant gaps between what we were trying to do and how communities were responding. And so issues of poverty, of social inclusion were not being addressed in a real way. And there was actually some resentment emerging in communities at the end of the program.
And I assume that, I mean, certainly my experience has been that in different communities, different subgroups within the community are dominant in particular places. That's almost inevitable. Some programs are dominated more by women, some by men, some by younger people, some by particular economic activities. It might be fishing or farming or some forms of craft. Was that your experience too? That it
Yes, in
varies.
fact, it was a very important lesson we learned from the Heritage Tourism Program, that you could not assume that communities were homogenous or the people who led the communities were the same. And so you had to work with different agencies or different groups in different communities. For example, in some communities, women were more dominant. In other communities, you had to work with youth. In other communities, you worked with the village council. So it changed. And so the assumption that you can describe communities as homogenous, that once you talk about a community, talk about it, it really is not the case. It was an important lesson that we had learned at the end of the Heritage Tourism Program. How to address that and how to deal with that becomes another important strategy and required a different type of modeling for going forward.
One of the things that's always struck me about that community-based tourism work is that when you talk to the businesses, particularly if they're chain hotels, there's a tendency to think that it will be the same in every community because, you know, if it's a particular hotel chain, they have a way of doing things. There is the way that that business delivers. Whereas in fact, communities are infinitely varied, really. You can only have common principles. The way in which it plays out is so dependent on the structure of the community and the kinds of activities and experiences that the community can offer to tourists.
Yeah, and different communities at different levels of understanding of entrepreneurial capacity, and you have to meet them where they're at. And so your interventions, your capacity building interventions, the linkages that you establish between even players within that community need to be community specific. And therefore, that's why it takes time. It takes time working with communities, and it takes almost a generation almost to work with communities to understand where they're at. And in fact, that is why I make comparisons in my book between the library community and the Soufrière community, both with interventions, but both requiring different types of interventions and looking at the differences that emerge in those two communities.
And in the end, with those different approaches, were they equally successful?
No, they were very different. Soufrique continues to suffer from a lot of inequality, poor distribution of wealth, and lots of social problems. Labri, that adopted a more people-centered, participatory approach to development, saw significant differences in its tourism product and in the response of visitors to the community. It attracts a very different type of visitor. And that is an extremely important lesson for approaches to community-based tourism.
Can we move on to talk a bit about the business cases? It seems to me that one of the problems in parts of the Caribbean, not I think in the parts that you've worked in, but it's certainly we know that there are places where it's difficult for tourists to go outside of the enclaves, of the compounds in which they spend their time, because the community is quite hostile to the tourists. It has always seemed to me that essentially, I think this is really important to understand this if you're going to move into community-based tourism, that a tourist coming into a community is somebody who's bringing money in from outside. And there's a number of different ways you can get the money off that tourist. You can find employment in the hotel industry or in an attraction. You can earn some money that way. You can find something to sell to the tourist, or frankly, you can just rob the tourist. And if you don't get the community on side, that's the problem you're going to have. The license to operate for the hotel simply gets removed.
Yep. Yep. And that is the difference that we see in communities that have adopted a more participatory, taken time to build community understanding, community participation, and ensuring community involvement in not just as servers or as people working in the industry, but as entrepreneurs, as people providing services to the visitor, almost on an equal level and being respected as such, as providing the service, whether it's craft or working in a hotel, or even running a small accommodation property, which Labri, in our case, is beginning to excel in, and providing, as well as restaurants, and providing what is almost a world-class product. Everything to do with how they were engaged at the start.
And of course, that's the reason why some destinations are more successful, isn't it? Because the experience the guest has is not just the experience of being inside the resort or the hotel. It's the experience they have when they go outside. And when the market trend is going in that direction, people are looking for experiences. They're no longer happy just to stay within the hotel or the resort. They want to get out and mix with the community. Yeah. And therefore, being good at community-based tourism is really important, it seems to me, for all entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And for the country in the end, because you then have visitors who will actually spend more within your local economy, which is what you want to do in terms of increasing the contribution of the tourist dollar and reducing leakages.
Yeah, and of course, for the business, you're more likely to get people repeat or stay longer, both of which are good for your bottom line. And on top of that, of course, you get the obvious market advantages of having a much richer experience for people to have. I mean, I think back to my parents who would go to somewhere like Malta, they'd eat fish and chips, they'd drink English beer, they'd lie in the sun. But modern tourists are not doing that. They want to have an experience of the culture and the food, the kind of everyday life of the people in that community, and that means they have to be able to get out and mix with the community.
Yeah, and they end up giving back more. I mean, it's amazing to see some of the experiments being done by my own friend Cook, who coined the phrase "caring entrepreneur," and he's running some programs, and he's actually having visitors who are coming in and saying, "Look, how can I help?" and giving laptops to children, giving substantial support to schools and to areas in a way that you wouldn't find an average visitor doing. And they do it because they feel a sense of a sense of they're connecting with a community in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise in the traditional modes of tourism that we've had.
Yeah, in the words of the Cape Town Declaration from 2002, that sense of a meaningful connection based on respect between the host and the guest. And
Right.
really, tourism still has a long way to go, I think, to really capitalize on that approach. But it definitely makes a difference to the willingness of the tourists to repeat or to recommend others to come and stay in the destination.
Yeah, that is so on point, because the first title of the book when I began writing was something and mutual satisfaction of host and guests, which is my original title. But as it evolved and for capturing a different, trying to appeal to a certain clientele, my advisor said to me, the caring entrepreneur is perhaps a new term that can probably begin to get swing and get some connection from investors, from the business community, that it really is about how you invest and how government facilitates investors along certain modes of thinking, which is what we've captured in the book. To think about corporate social responsibility, to think about an equal contribution that you want to establish between the financial benefits, the environmental benefits, and the benefits to culture and community. That there's an equal weighting given to how you assess the investment determination. And it's not just about the financial bottom line. So the caring entrepreneur was a deliberate term that the reviewers of the book said that is going to have greater catch than host and guests.
I have to say, when you first told me you were going to write a book about community-based tourism, I was a little bit depressed. I thought the world doesn't need another book about community-based tourism. I think what you've done, and I really would recommend to people they go and get a copy of the book. What you've done by the way in which you've written it as the caring entrepreneur is you've put community-based tourism in a completely different place. You've made it make business sense, but also make sense for the community and to add to the product quality of the destination, so that in a sense the whole community, the business and the community, are benefiting from a better kind of tourism. And it's using tourism to make better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit in that order, which is the fundamental point about responsible tourism.
Absolutely. Well said, Harold. Well said. I mean, I couldn't have said it better than that. Yes.
Sylvester, thanks very much for your time this afternoon. There'll be a slide at the end of this telling people where they can get hold of a copy of the book, and I look forward to hearing how it goes. I think it's a really big step forward to have broken the mold of a series of case studies about community-based tourism and a kind of boring academic treatment of the thing. It's absolutely wonderful to see your experience presented in the way you've done that through the Caring Entrepreneur book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. You have.